What if the one soul who truly understood your pain wasn't another person at all, but a lonely creature hidden deep within the Wild West mountains? Clara Bennett never imagined that the road of heartbreak would lead her to a place where fate had already prepared an unexpected miracle. 7 months pregnant, and carrying nothing except a worn travel bag and broken dreams, she climbed the rocky trail beneath darkening skies. Every painful step reminded her of the man who had promised forever and vanished the moment he discovered she was expecting his child. Back in the valley town, cruel whispers followed her everywhere. Friends disappeared. Neighbors looked away. Storekeepers served her without kindness. Meanwhile, the man responsible had married into wealth and erased her from his life as though she had never existed. The betrayal had wounded her deeply, yet somewhere inside, a tiny spark refused to die. She kept moving because there was nowhere left to turn. Evening fog drifted across the mountains while icy wind swept over the hills. Her body ached with exhaustion, and more than once she considered giving up. But through the mist, she spotted an old stone cabin overlooking endless coffee fields. Though weathered by time and missing several roof tiles, the house remained standing. Relief washed over her tired body. As she approached, another sound reached her ears. A deep, sorrowful moo echoed through the silence. It wasn't ordinary. There was pain hidden within it. Curious, Clara followed the sound to an old stable, partly concealed by wild bushes. Inside stood a large brown cow. The animal appeared healthy, yet sadness filled her eyes. She stared toward the doorway as if waiting for someone who would never return. Clara understood immediately. No explanation was necessary. Someone had taken away what the animal loved most. Tears gathered in her eyes because she recognized that same pain. Both had been abandoned. Both had suffered unbearable loss. Both had been forced to continue, despite broken hearts. "Looks like we're both forgotten," Clara whispered softly. The cow slowly turned and looked directly into her eyes. Something unusual passed between them in that silent moment. Not fear, not curiosity. Recognition. Night arrived quickly. Inside the abandoned cabin, dust covered the furniture and spiderwebs clung to every corner, but there was shelter and a fireplace. Clara cleaned a small area beside the hearth and settled down for the night. Outside, the lonely cow continued calling through the darkness. Strangely, the sound comforted her. Knowing another living soul shared her sorrow made the night feel less frightening. Resting her hands over her unborn child, Clara stared at the ceiling and wondered who once lived there and why they had left. She had no answers, but for the first time in many months, hope returned. The first rays of morning sunlight entered through the cracked windows. Clara stepped outside and heard the familiar sound once again. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, she walked toward the stable. The brown cow immediately approached her. This time there was no hesitation. The animal gently lowered her head and allowed Clara to stroke her forehead. Warmth spread through Clara's heart. "Good morning, beautiful," she whispered. The cow answered softly and nudged her shoulder. A smile appeared on Clara's face for the first time in weeks. Hunger soon reminded her of reality. She had little food and almost no money. Exploring the property, she discovered a clear stream and several fruit trees carrying late-season apples. It wasn't much, but it would keep her alive. Everywhere she looked, signs of loving hands remained. Someone had cared deeply for this place. By afternoon, dark clouds gathered overhead. Rain began falling while thunder echoed across the mountains. Sitting beside the fireplace, Clara felt her baby kick strongly. A quiet laugh escaped her lips. Maybe life had not abandoned her completely. As evening approached, another sound reached her ears. Hoofbeats. Looking through the rain-covered window, she saw a rider approaching the cabin. Her heart raced. She had not seen another person since arriving. The stranger stopped outside and climbed down from his horse. Tall and broad-shouldered beneath a weathered ranch coat, he tied the horse near the porch and knocked on the door. Gathering her courage, Clara opened it. The man looked surprised. His eyes moved from her face to her pregnant belly and back again. "I didn't expect anyone to be here," he said calmly. Clara tightened her grip on the door. "Neither did I." The stranger glanced toward the stable where the brown cow stood watching. Something softened in his expression. "Looks like Daisy finally trusts someone again," he said quietly. At that moment, neither Clara nor the mysterious rancher realized that destiny had already begun weaving together two wounded hearts whose lives would soon change forever. Rain continued falling outside as the stranger stepped beneath the porch and removed his hat. Water dripped from the brim while thunder echoed across the mountains. Clara remained cautious, but something about the man's calm eyes made her feel strangely safe. "My name is Ethan Walker," he said quietly. "This property belonged to my father." Clara immediately lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to steal anything. I just needed shelter." Ethan studied her face for a moment before shaking his head. "You don't owe me an apology. Nobody should be left alone in the mountains." His words surprised her. She had become so used to judgment that simple kindness felt unfamiliar. Without another word, Ethan brought a sack inside and placed it on the table. Fresh bread, vegetables, dried meat, and coffee beans spilled out. Clara stared at the supplies in disbelief. "I can't accept this," she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. "Looks like you need them more than I do." Emotion rose inside her chest. For months, nobody had shown kindness without expecting something in return. She quickly turned away so he wouldn't notice the tears in her eyes. Ethan pretended not to see. Outside, Daisy remained near the stable entrance, quietly watching the cabin through the rain. Over the following days, Ethan returned several times. Sometimes he repaired broken fences. Other times he brought food or chopped firewood. He never asked painful questions and never treated Clara with pity. Slowly, the abandoned cabin began feeling less lonely. Clara learned that Ethan owned a ranch several miles away. After his father's death, all responsibility had fallen onto his shoulders. Years of hard work had left little room for anything else. Despite carrying heavy burdens, he remained patient, dependable, and kind. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch overlooking the endless coffee fields, Clara finally asked the question that had troubled her since the day they met. "Why do you keep helping me?" Ethan leaned against the railing and looked toward the distant mountains. "Because somebody should have helped you long ago." The simple answer left her speechless. There were no hidden intentions, no grand promises, just kindness, real kindness. Weeks passed and friendship slowly blossomed between them. Evenings were spent beside the fireplace sharing stories. Clara told him about her childhood and dreams she once had. Ethan spoke about growing up on the ranch and losing his father. Sometimes they laughed together. Sometimes they sat in silence, comfortable simply being near each other. Even Daisy seemed different. The lonely cow followed Clara everywhere around the property. The sadness in her eyes had begun to fade. It was almost as though both of them were healing together. One evening, while feeding apples to Daisy, Ethan smiled. She never used to follow anyone. Clara laughed softly. Maybe she just likes having company. Ethan looked at her for a moment longer than usual. Maybe she's not the only one. Clara felt warmth rise to her cheeks and quickly lowered her eyes. Somewhere deep inside, a part of her heart that she believed had died was beginning to wake again. Yet fear remained. She had trusted once before, and that trust had destroyed her life. She refused to let herself hope too much, but fate had other plans. One cold night, violent winds shook the mountains while heavy rain battered the roof. Clara suddenly woke with a sharp pain that stole her breath. At first she tried convincing herself it was nothing, but another pain came, then another. Fear gripped her heart. The baby was coming. Alone inside the cabin, she struggled to remain calm. The storm outside had turned the trails into rivers of mud. Nobody could possibly reach her in time. Another contraction hit and she cried out. Outside, Daisy suddenly became restless. The cow began mooing loudly and repeatedly, but this time it wasn't sadness. It was urgency. Again and again Daisy called into the darkness. The storm raged while the lonely animal refused to stop. Nearly an hour later, powerful hoofbeats thundered across the mountains. A rider emerged through the rain. Ethan had heard Daisy's desperate cries from a nearby pasture and followed the sound through the storm. Bursting through the cabin door, one look at Clara told him everything. Without hesitation, he rushed to her side, and as lightning flashed across the sky and thunder shook the mountains, neither of them knew that before sunrise, their lives would be changed forever. Without wasting a second, Ethan took control of the frightening situation. The storm outside showed no mercy as rain pounded against the roof and powerful winds rattled the old windows. Clara gripped the blanket tightly while another wave of pain swept through her body. Fear filled her eyes, but Ethan remained calm. He kept the fire burning, heated water, and stayed beside her through every painful moment. Hours passed while the mountains trembled beneath thunder and lightning. Outside, Daisy refused to leave the cabin. The faithful cow stood near the window, releasing anxious calls into the darkness as though she understood that something precious was about to enter the world. Just before dawn, the cries of a newborn baby finally filled the little cabin. Tears streamed down Clara's face as Ethan carefully placed the child into her arms. A beautiful baby girl, healthy, perfect, alive. For several moments, Clara could only stare at her daughter. Every betrayal, every lonely night, every cruel word she had endured suddenly felt far away. Through her tears, she smiled and gently kissed the baby's forehead. Ethan stood nearby with emotion shining in his eyes. Outside, the storm had finally passed. Golden sunlight slowly spread across the mountains while Daisy appeared beside the window as if waiting for news. Clara looked toward the loyal animal and smiled through her tears. "We made it, old girl," she whispered softly. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Slowly, life transformed the forgotten property into something beautiful again. Flowers bloomed beside the porch, broken fences were repaired, laughter replaced silence. The cabin that once stood, abandoned, now felt alive. Clara had found far more than shelter among the mountains. She had found peace. Ethan became a constant part of their lives. He cared for the baby, as though she were his own. Every evening he would rock the little girl to sleep while Clara prepared supper beside the fireplace. There were no promises, no pressure, and no rushed feelings. Trust returned naturally. Love grew quietly between them, stronger with every passing day. Even Daisy had changed. The sadness that once filled her eyes had disappeared. The lonely mother who had mourned her lost calf now spent her days peacefully grazing near the cabin, always close to the family she had unknowingly helped create. One warm afternoon, while Clara hung fresh laundry beneath the blue sky, a familiar wagon appeared on the distant road. Her smile vanished instantly when she recognized the man climbing down from it. It was the same man who had abandoned her months earlier. Time had not been kind to him. His expensive clothes were gone and worry covered his face. Slowly, he approached the porch while Ethan stepped outside. The stranger glanced toward the baby sleeping in Clara's arms and lowered his eyes. "I made a terrible mistake," he admitted quietly. "I lost everything. Please, Clara, give me another chance." Once upon a time, hearing those words would have shattered her heart. But not anymore. Clara looked toward Ethan standing beside her and then down at her daughter. Finally, she smiled gently. "You left us when we needed you most," she answered calmly. "And while you were gone, life gave me something better than I ever imagined." The man looked at Ethan and understood immediately. Without another word, he nodded sadly and walked away. Clara watched him disappear down the road without anger or regret. Some chapters were never meant to be reopened. That evening, as the sun painted the mountains gold, Ethan sat beside Clara on the porch. Their daughter slept peacefully between them, while Daisy grazed nearby beneath the warm sunset. Ethan reached into his pocket and removed a small velvet box. Clara's eyes widened in surprise. "I know life brought us together in the most unexpected way," he said softly, "but every day with you feels like home. Clara Bennett, will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes once more, but these were tears of happiness. Smiling through them, she squeezed his hand tightly. "Yes," she whispered. "Always yes." Months later, beneath a bright Wild West sky and surrounded by close friends from neighboring ranches, Clara and Ethan were married. Their little daughter laughed in her mother's arms, while Daisy stood peacefully near the fence, as if she too were celebrating. Sometimes life breaks people before leading them toward something beautiful. Sometimes the road begins with heartbreak and loneliness. But sometimes, hidden among the Wild West mountains, fate creates miracles for those who refuse to stop believing. And sometimes, a lonely mother and a grieving cow become the beginning of a family neither of them ever expected. Thank you for riding with Wild West Tales Stories. If this journey touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and saddle up for more unforgettable tales where hope, love, and destiny always find their way home.